Coming to you from Atlanta, Georgia. Welcome to the Wisdom Speaks Podcast. I'm your host, Reverend Lanico Cash. Join me here every week as I challenge our culture's very common misconceptions about faith and address the concepts of faith that have been deemed unacceptable and displeasing to God. I'm so glad you're joining me today. Imagine being in a place where you begin to feel an energy shift within yourself. Everything about you begins to change and begins to feel a little different. Your walk is different. Your talk is different. The way you've always processed and taken in information is different, feels different. The way that you are and the way that you're becoming around people, around certain places, around certain things, just begins to feel a little different. Change. Your standards begin to feel different in the change. The things that you're able to tolerate, the things that you want to tolerate are different. Come on now, your appetite is just starting. Your spiritual appetite, your emotional appetite, your mental appetite just begins to demand something more and something different. Well, go with me, because today I want to talk to you about 4 signs that God is calling you to a higher level. Now, it is true that when God is ready to move you to the next level, it does often come with things such as greater influence. You begin to be able to influence people in a certain way, and it definitely comes with greater blessings, right? Your life is blessed in a way that you never imagined, right? But before you get too excited about that, please caution. Be careful. Be careful to be ready, right? When you get there, be careful to be as prepared as you possibly can be when the time comes, when God is calling. And so one of the biggest points here that I want to make first and foremost is this. I want you to remember this as we journey through today. When God is ready to call you higher, when He does begin calling you higher, you have to know that God is going to be more concerned with your character than He is your comfort. I'm going to say that again. That when God is ready to call you higher, you must know that He is going to be more concerned with your character than He is your comfort. So know this, it will require an energy shift. So let me give you the first sign. Whenever God is ready to call you to something higher, something bigger, and to another level, it is always going to require you to dig deeper. It's going to always require you to dig deeper within yourself, right? To deal with some things, to straighten out some things, to process through some things. So for this point, I want you to think about a tree. Think about the biggest and strongest tree and the tallest tree that you've seen. That tree, if you stand and look and see as tall as it goes, you may look up and down that tree, and the higher up that tree goes, you see that tree go. If you were to dig that tree in the ground, if you were to dig into that tree, you best believe that just as high as you see that tree go, you best believe the roots go just as deep. And so the point with that is that just like ourselves, the higher up we go, the deeper God is going to call us to go as well. What do I mean by that? God is going to call you to dig a little deeper within yourself. It's going to cause you to ask some questions of yourself. How do you handle conflict? How do you handle people? How do you handle people behind closed doors when no one is watching? Not when the cameras are on, not when people are around, but how do you conduct yourself? How do you act when no one is watching? How do you deal with the things that make you vulnerable? Do you run to certain vices when things get uncomfortable? Do you run away from problems because you don't want to deal with them? Do you run to other people? Do you run up under people or certain people because that's what makes you comfortable when you get uncomfortable? How do you handle these things? These are all character development things that God is going to call out of you when He does begin to call you higher, when He's ready to call you higher. These are things that God is going to call you to deal with and to dig into. And so if you feel these things, if you begin to feel these things happening to where they are encountering you more and more, conflict is encountering you more and more to see how you deal with these things. People that may be difficult to deal with encounter you more so that you are tested to see how you handle people, how you handle conflict. When you see that these things keep coming towards you, that's a sure sign that God is taking you higher. And so the calling on your life, the call to come higher, is going to require you to do a little bit of digging. And just like that tree, if you're going to stand tall, you're going to have to dig deep. That's the reality. And so when you begin to feel these things happening in your life, when you begin to feel the urges to deal with things that you may have never dealt with before, when you get called out of a comfortable space with certain people because your appetite begins to demand that you come up higher with people and come up higher with your standards of people and the places in which you are or go, that's a sure sign that God is calling you higher and is calling you to something higher. And so I want you to be encouraged, because if you do find yourself, and if you are finding yourself in this position where you are feeling this thing happening, just know that wisdom is going to, the more you deal with, the more you're willing to deal with, the more wisdom you will attain. And that wisdom, beloved, is what you're going to need for where you're going. Trust and believe. God would not be calling these things out of you if you did not need to straighten these areas up, if you did not need to clean these areas up. So the second sign that God may be calling you higher is this: that when God is calling you, when He is calling you to something higher, it will require you to leave behind what you're most familiar with. Familiarity. That's a very interesting thing. Because, see, in the culture we live in, we have used familiarity kind of as a marker. We've used it as a marker for success. Because, see, if we can get to the place, or if we get to a place where we feel is successful, that means we were familiar with this thing. We knew this thing. And so it brought us to this place of success. And the things in which we feel most comfortable with, and the things that and the people that we feel most comfortable with, have become our markers for success. And familiarity is directly connected to comfort. But remember what I said at the beginning, that when God is ready to call you higher, you must remember this one key point, that He is going to be more concerned with your character than He is your comfort. And so we have to be able, and we have to be ready to understand that familiarity, you have to be able to leave behind what you're most familiar with. And I know that sometimes, that being familiar with things and with people and with places is what we have come in this culture. We've come to cling to familiarity because it's comfortable. We come to cling to the people that we are most comfortable with, the things that we're most comfortable with, the ideas, right? Oh, I know this way. If you think about it in this sense, every day we exercise this truth about familiarity. The same way we go to work. Why? Because it's what's familiar. We know this way. The same things in which we do because we know this thing. We go in certain directions because we're familiar with it, and we think that just because we're familiar with things that's the way we should be going. But familiarity, be careful, can also cause you to not need God. When you are familiar with everything, you don't need God. You see how that works? When you know something, you don't need to depend on nobody, on nothing but yourself, because you know it. And see, God knows this truth. And because he knows this truth, that's why his call requires you to leave behind the very things that you have become the most familiar with. And so I'll jump in right here and testify to this thing right here. Every single vision that God has given to me has been unfamiliar, has been something that I didn't really have much of a clue, including this platform right here. And that's actually over the years and over the time that I've spent with God, I've actually began to be able to use that as a sign for myself of when I see and when I know that the hand of God is present in my life. That's actually been a sign for me. That's actually become a very familiar sign for me. Is that when I'm called to something, I'm not that familiar with it. And so that's how I've come to know actually when the hand of God is present and when God is calling me. And so that's how I'm able to stand here or sit here and tell you this and to testify to this, because God really does call you to the unfamiliar places. But even in my unfamiliarity, if you will, that is also the place that God has managed to bless me the best. In those same places, even though I didn't know much about it, those have been the places that God has blessed me the best. Because what it does is, when I am there, when I get these calls, or when we get these calls, what it requires of you is going to require you to do some research. It's going to require you to find out what this thing means, and find out what it is, and find out how this thing works, and find out how your audience is going to receive those things, and so forth and so on. And so being in an unfamiliar place is really the numerous stories in the Bible. God called his people to a place that they didn't know anything about. But that was the beauty of their journey, and that was the beauty of the land of milk and honey that they were going to step into. And so know that when you are being called, so when you begin to feel like an urge, or when you begin to hear this voice on the inside of you tell you to go in a certain way, and you don't know about it, you don't know much about it, or you don't know anything about it, but you know that you've heard it, I encourage you to seek the Lord and seek his spirit, because that is going to be how you know that God is calling you higher. Is so when you begin to hear that urge to move in a different way than what you're used to, and when you begin to feel that urge to move in a certain way, or to move out even of a certain presence of people, places, and things, cling to that and know that that is a sure sign that God could be calling you to something higher. So let me give you the third sign. Whenever God calls you to something higher, it always, and I want you to underline that word, always, It will always require you to get out of the comfort of your current identity and comprehension. So I'm going to say that again because that's a mouthful. Whenever God begins to call you to something higher, it is always going to require you to get out of the comfort of your current identity and understanding and comprehension. Now, I know that we come from a culture that teaches us and that trains us to identify ourselves by certain markers. And there are quite a few of those markers. I'll name a few. Our upbringing is an example. How we were raised, right? I come from this kind of family. Or, my family did these things. Or my family provided these things. Or my family didn't have these things. And our upbringing has made us and caused us to identify ourselves by that. Education. Oh, because I have received this certain kind of degree. I have this degree, and so this is who I am. I have this level of education, and so this is who I am. Career is another marker in which we use to identify ourselves, right? I chose this. A lot of us will climb choose a certain industry and climb that industry's ladder. And that begins to be how we identify ourselves because of how high we've been able to climb or how much we've been able to attain in our careers, in the chosen careers. And then, of course, there's the good old one. Society's standards and society's traditions is a big marker in which we have come to understand and identify who we are, right? As a man, society says that you should do this. As a woman, society says that this should be your role. This should be the thing you do. At this age, this is what you should be out here trying to do. And society's traditions and standards begin to create an identification for us. But when God is calling you, when God begins to call you higher, you're going to have to get out of the comfort of all of that. Because you see, when God begins to level you up, it's not going to matter so much what family you came from. It's not going to matter so much the career you chose. It's not going to matter so much how much education you have or what kind of education you have. Those things are great, but they are not dictators of your future. They are not dictators of how successful you will be in the kingdom with God in your life. And so when God is calling you, when God begins to call you higher, you will feel that difference. And so when you begin to get to a point in your life where these things I thought mattered don't really feel like they matter so much all of a sudden. You might get to a point where you feel that as importantly as you thought these things were, these markers were, all of a sudden you still feel different. You still feel like they don't matter as much. That's a sure sign when you feel that way, that God is beginning to call you higher, because you are certainly going to have to let go of what you are most familiar with, and you're going to have to let go of the comfort of how you have always come to identify yourself. And when those things start to matter less and less for you in your mind and in your spirit, you can rest assured that that is a sign that God is calling you higher. And so my last sign, that brings me to my last sign. The last sign that God is calling you higher is that when he begins to call you higher, God will isolate you. He will isolate you. You see, what do I mean? So when you are getting called higher, when you are getting this call, You are not going to be able, you have to understand that you're not going to be able to be on the scene all the time. Understand that there will be periods and seasons where you will be called into isolation by God. And so you won't be able in those times, no matter what you try, no matter how you feel, you won't be able to be with every person. You won't be able to be in every place. You won't be able to be into everything. And so, but hear me, it's not that God, I don't want you to think that God thinks that there's something wrong with maybe the people perhaps in your life that you begin to step back from, or that you begin to be isolated from. It's not that there may be anything particularly wrong with that in every case. In some cases, yes, but maybe not in all. But it's just that God calls you into isolation because he needs you. And when God needs you, he needs you more. And I want you to think about this place of isolation. It's not like a jail. It's not like being locked away anywhere with no freedom to move about. But instead, this place of isolation, you could think about like a secret place. A secret place. Thank you, Holy Spirit. And this secret place is a secret place where God will call you, will neatly tuck you away in for a time. And he's very intentional with that because he cares for you. He takes good care of you when you're in this place. But he calls you into a secret place. And he does it for a very intentional reason. It is to talk to you. He calls you into this secret place to have your undivided attention, to give you instruction, to give you direction, and to tell you like a GPS. He wants to be able to tell you which street to turn down, which way to go, turn left here. When you get up here, make a U or make a left turn, right? And so he calls you into this secret place, and he does isolate you for a season. And so the way this feels is all of a sudden you may feel disconnected from people, certain people, or sometimes most people. You may feel disconnected, and you may, when you get a call that asks to go to certain places and to do certain things, all of a sudden you might feel this nudge that says, no, you don't need to go here, or no, you don't need to be in the presence of this person. And then so you begin to feel a little disconnected from people. Not that anything is wrong with the people in your life, but when God needs you, he needs you more. And so again, it's a comfort thing. God will call you out of all the things in which you are comfortable with. There will seem to be a major disruption in your life that happens. And I understand this about disruption. Disruption in your life is never, ever easy. It's never easy, but it's always necessary. And so when God begins to disrupt the very things in your life that you've become familiar with and that you've become comfortable with, know that again, he is more concerned with who you are developing into and who you need to develop into to get where he wants you to be, more so than your comfort. And so when he begins to disrupt those things in your life, those are sure signs. These are sure signs that God is calling you to a higher place. And so I want to encourage you with this word today, that even when you feel these things happening, be encouraged, because know this, that God, feel comfortable in this and feel confident in this, that God does not call you and does not equip you. And so if he is indeed calling you with any of these signs today, then know and be rest assured that he is going to equip you. And so you don't have to worry how you will do it. You don't have to worry when it will happen. You don't have to worry about if it will happen or if it can happen, because God certainly equips those whom he calls. And so I encourage you again today, and my prayer for you is this, that you will allow God to speak to your spirit. And when he's speaking to your spirit, answer the call and seek God, seek his face, so that he may be able to give you exactly what it is you need, so that he can take you to the place in which he has designed for you. And so I urge you to let the Lord change your heart. Let the Lord change your mind. Let the Lord lead and guide you exactly to where he wants you to be, because it is the place where he will bless you the best. All right? So until next time, y'all, that's it. And that ends this hour of the Wisdom Speaks podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to this podcast and to leave me a review on our Facebook page, as well as share this episode with a friend. You may reach me with any questions or comments at thewissdomspeakspodcast@gmail.com. Connect with me on Instagram, Facebook, and on YouTube. If you would like to support this podcast, which would be very much appreciated, you can certainly do so by way of my website, CashApp, Venmo, or by becoming a member of my Patreon, all searchable under the Wisdom Speaks Podcast. Thanks everyone for tuning in. Have a great week.